Greetings, traveler, I'm SnapJelly, and I'm coming at you again with a bunch of minutes of me rambling about sword-related stuff that no one even asked about. Actually, this time someone did ask about it, because in case you didn't know, for people who donate $10 or more on my Patreon account, get as a special reward that they get to choose a topic for a future video, and this topic was chosen by Philip Serov. I try my best with your names, guys, but I'm stupid, so it doesn't really work very well. Anyway, Philip asks if I can make a video talking about a modern sport fencing and how it compares and differs to HEMA. And well, yes, I can. In fact, I can probably talk about this for hours on end. This is just it's a fun topic for me because actually, sport fencing is not a lot like HEMA, but it's something that I do appreciate, kind of. I like it, I enjoy it. There are some sport fencers in my HEMA club. I have done some foil fencing with them, which I don't have any footage of, and even if I did have footage of it, I wouldn't show you, because I'm bad at it. But anyway, I think it's fun. I really think it's fun as sport fencing. So let's just start somewhere. Let's start with how sport fencing developed. You see, the foil, the fencing foil, there's three different kinds of swords that people use in modern fencing. You have the foil, the epee, and the saber. You know, usually people fence with foils, with fencing foils. And the fencing foil developed as a practice weapon for the small sword. Now, in dueling culture, basically the small sword was a very stiff, deadly skewer type weapon. It looks very flimsy, but it's quite deadly. It's just a very stiff, sharp, pointy spike that you stick in people, and well, if you get stuck with something like that, you die. But the foil was not. So when people dueled, you know, people dueled with small swords as well, but for the most part, people didn't like duels to be to the death, and when people dueled with foils, right, duels were very often until first blood. So it was most important that a foil was light and it was pointy at the end, so you could give people a little scratch. You didn't have to kill them. You could, of course, stab an eye out still with something like that, but you know, it was just about hitting your opponent first. And that's something that you still see with modern fencing today. If modern fencing foil has a little button on the end, and if you stab your opponent so that little button is pressed, that means you win a point and the lights go off or bell or whatever. That's how it works. It's electronic, so there's not a lot of room for mistakes there. It's just, oh, your button is pressed, you win, you score a point or whatever. There is some difference in pointing systems and rules between the different swords that there are in modern fencing, but basically that's the gist of it. In HEMA, it really doesn't work that way, to be honest. You see, HEMA, what it tries to do is reconstruct historical fighting the best way possible, in a safe way. So it's trying to reconstruct how deadly combat was back then without it actually being deadly combat. This is not flawless. There's a lot of room for error, and sport fencing became more of an official sport, so it needed dedicated rules. HEMA doesn't really have dedicated rules saying, oh, this scores a point, that scored a point. It depends on tournaments. And lots of tournaments actually also rely partially on the honesty of the fencers, on the fencers being honest about if their blows really hit well or if they didn't hit well. Because in HEMA, if you, for example, hit with the flat side of your blade, that wouldn't really score a point because that an attack like that wouldn't actually do any damage if it was an actual fight with a sharp sword. So in the judges in HEMA tournaments, they try and look for if attacks were actually strong enough, if they would be strong enough and done properly enough in order for the wound to be sufficient enough to be an actual deadly wound, or at least wound your opponent a lot. And in sport fencing, none of that matters. It's basically just tap your opponent first and then you... I mean, don't get me wrong, it might sound a little bit degrading towards sport fencing, but I really don't feel that way because I like it. I do. It's a sport that I really like, but it's not swordsmanship like you would see in HEMA. It's just a completely different mindset, really. So also I want to say something now I think about it. When you say fencing, people tend to of course think about modern fencing, but technically fencing is just a word for sword fighting. So if you practice Italian or German longsword or whatever, you're a longsword fencer. This can be a bit confusing because one of the weapons that people use in modern fencing is called a saber. And if you're a historical saber fencer, then people like to, put the term historical in front of it just to make the distinction. Otherwise you're just a saber fencer, and that could be modern or historical. I do think also that, I believe, I'm not 100% sure of this, but I believe that the names for the swords in modern fencing come from French. And I think that in France, officially, what the type of sword is determined by the type of hilt. And that's why a modern fencing saber is called a saber, because it has a saber hilt, so that makes it a saber. But still, using that effectively, if you would call it that, is quite a lot different from historical sabers. And then even in historical sabers, there's a lot of difference between individual sabers. So, yeah, There you go. Next point. Next point is it's fucking hot here in the Netherlands. I thought I lived in a cold country, but no. Seems like I don't. Next point is HEMA is not for lack of a better word, let's say official sport. Like it's not an Olympic sport or anything like that. And personally, I don't think it really ever can be. At least okay, here's the thing. If you want if you want anything to be an official sport, you need concrete rules. And HEMA doesn't have that, because fighting, actual combat, which is what it's trying to reconstruct, it isn't concrete. Like there are writings of people getting stabbed in the neck or in the face and surviving, right? And likewise, there's also writings of people getting stabbed in the torso and just immediately falling down with the sword of their opponent still in their body. So taking the swords with them on the way down. There's lots of tales about people getting hit and surviving and continuing battling, and you may as well just die like that. A body is weird, bodies do weird things, especially with the adrenaline pumping, and you just don't know. You can't always tell what's gonna happen. I mean, we try to make it like realistic combat the best we can, but there's always limitations. So one thing that I think would help HEMA a lot is just like very high speed instant replay cameras. Because then if it's really hard for judges to actually see what's going on. It's so damn fast, you just go whang and the judges have to see what the hell's going on. And if it's an Olympic sport and whatever, like people are less likely to be honest, which is one of the things that I think is cool about HEMA, that most people, at least most fencers, are honest with if they don't hit well or if they do hit well or something like that, or if they get hit first. Because it's very hard to see from the outside. If you have a high-speed camera watching you that you can instant replay, that you can always see precisely what happened, that would benefit a lot. HEMA would benefit from that a lot, I think. But other than that, it's always like open for debate. We haven't figured out the golden set of rules that says this is the most like actual deadly combat that we can get without actually killing each other. And personally, I think it doesn't exist. But these differences is something that makes HEMA fun. Because, well, different fencers and different schools have different ideas about things, and you can debate about that and fight each other, literally fight each other with your different ideas and different mindsets and different interpretations of things. And that's simply something that's really cool. Also, something that people ask is if you have a background in modern fencing, if that would actually benefit you one way or another, if you would start doing HEMA fencing. Yes, no, maybe so, kind of. It's strange. It would benefit you certainly if you've done any kind of sport, any kind of physical activity, because then you would be more in shape, I would assume, and that could help. It's not per se necessary to be in great shape to be a good fencer, but like HEMA fencer, I don't know about sport fencing. But anyway, but I think it helps at least. And on the other hand, there are just certain principles of HEMA that, like the afterblow, for example. Sport fencers don't have to worry about the afterblow. The afterblow is getting hit right after you hit your opponent, because in real combat, your opponent might not actually instantly die if he gets hit. So even if you do hit your opponent, you gotta mind your opponent actually still finishing his strike and hitting you. So you gotta defend yourself, even if you've hit your opponent. And in sport fencing, that's not the case. You tap your opponent first, you win, you score the point. So that's a major difference. Another major difference is that I'm sweating my balls off. Okay. Another major difference is that HEMA clothing tends to be black and sport fencing clothing tends to be white. I don't know why that is. I think HEMA people just think black looks cool. Yeah, we're tough knights and stuff. Also, the other way around, let's say you do HEMA first and then start doing sport fencing. Would that benefit you? Kind of the same problem. Like, the principles are very, very different. With sport fencing, it's really important that you're the quickest, right? And with HEMA fencing, it's the most important thing is not getting hit, specifically. Of course, you would have to hit your opponent, and to hit your opponent, it's very beneficial if you're quicker than them. But it's the most important that you don't get hit, because if you get hit, you die, and you don't want to die. And you could also say that, you know, for if you do modern fencing and then you start doing rapier fencing, HEMA rapier fencing, you would be more used to it. That's something that I've noticed specifically amongst HEMA people. Most people that do HEMA do longsword of some sorts. It's the most basic thing. And a lot of people tend to not like rapier fencing. They say that it's girly and gay, but you know, I see through that bullshit. They just don't like it because it's hard. Rapier fencing is difficult, okay? Rapiers are heavy swords and you have to extend your arm constantly. It's very taxing on the body. It's relatively slow, actually. I think rapier fencing is a lot slower than longsword fencing. And well, you know, foil fencing, epee fencing and stuff like it's quite quick. So again, the principles are very different. I'd say that if you did modern fencing before, then it's going to be easier for you to do rapier fencing than if you've never done any kind of fencing before. But, like, you're not used to carrying a sword that is this big and bulky and heavy as a rapier. Because, well, foils are super light, and because of that people think rapiers are very light as well, but they're not. Rapiers they're heavy swords, especially for one-handed swords. They're bulky and big and strong. So, it's just, it's hard to compare the two. I think that's the best way of saying it. I think foil fencing was born from practicing small sword fencing and spadroon fencing, you could also say. And those things are HEMA. Small sword fencing and spadroon fencing are HEMA. So I think that if you do modern fencing, it would benefit you if you would later do small sword fencing or spadroon fencing. But everything that's before that is different. It was practiced in a different way. So, yeah, I could probably say a bunch more stuff, but I think I'm gonna repeat myself a lot as well. Actually, you know what? I might just make more videos about this. You know, anytime something pops up in my mind, or if you guys bring something up in the comments, I could talk about this. This is a fun thing to talk about, I think. So, yeah, I'm gonna do that. But I think this video is already getting quite long. It is. So, if you guys stuck around this long, you might as well subscribe. Also follow me on social media, links are in the description below. And if you want to choose a topic for a future video, then you can. Link to my Patreon is in the description. And thank you for joining my quest, and I hope you'll join me in the next one. Bye guys.